Great, thank you. So I called my talk today Listening 2.0. You often hear the phrase Health 2.0 or Medicine 2.0. You know, I called it Listening 2.0 because I remember what my grade 5 teacher taught me about listening, being active hearing, right? So something tangible there. And when I think about listening and active hearing, I think that that is what Health 2.0 really promises in terms of innovation. If we listen to patients more, if we listen to caregivers more on the internet, we'll be able to promote some extraordinary applications for patient engagement and for patient safety and any number of other issues that I'll just a few of which I'll talk about. So just in about 12 minutes, I'm just going to do a brief introduction to the Innovation Cell. We are a small, very small nonprofit with a view to commercialization, so we're a hybrid. I'm going to introduce you to some concepts around what I call frugal innovation, using web-based tools to improve the patient experience, to understand patients' needs in what I call real time. And then thirdly, I just want to land on one insight, one belief about the new era of healthcare. So what do? Well, we mine the web. We literally listen to billions of patient and caregiver conversations to try and understand patient needs. What do patients want, expect out of their healthcare system, both in Ontario and around the world? And we do that because we want to improve human health. So let's just bring it down to some concrete examples. So about a year ago, a colleague of mine and I, Carlos Rizzo, we started looking at Twitter, which is an open access microblogging tool on the web. You can talk about what you're doing at any given moment of the day. And we looked at mood signifiers on Twitter. And on Twitter, which is one of the things that's really neat, is you can actually designate whether you're happy or sad at any given moment in time. And what we did is we looked at 17,000 postings all across Canada, urban areas, rural areas, and we found that the ratio of happiness to sadness, really crude analysis here, but the ratio of happiness to sadness was relatively consistent with what very sophisticated StatsCan surveys were telling us. It's really expensive to surveil depression, to know how much of the population is depressed. And it's a huge, certainly human health burden, huge cost burden. So, we were tackling this in an unusual way. We started to get some attention to our findings. So this is something called Twink Collider, and it basically measures the relevance of your conversation, the buzz around your research findings vis-a-vis different conversations on the web. And the blowout sort of visual there is us, people talking about this new research. And so we started to get some attention there. We started to compete fairly well against other conversations, whether it was about Tiger Woods or what have you, right? So we did that. That came out 24 hours later. So this began us down this path. We're only about 13 months old. And the reason we're doing this is because we think there's an extraordinary opportunity here. And the opportunity is not so much that patients, GPs, experts are accessing health information online, but it's actually that patients are posting information online about their own healthcare condition, about what they want out of the healthcare system. And these conversations are extraordinary and offer all sorts of opportunities, and I believe that we need to listen to those conversations. Here's some of the things that are happening with these conversations. So there's a website called patientslikeme.com. It's basically focused on ALS, predominantly started by 2 MIT engineers, one of whom has since died, 2 brothers. 45,000 members. Canadians are disproportionately heavy users of patientslikeme.com. They share their intimate healthcare details on Patients Like Me. They talk about the off-label uses of drugs that they're using. It was profiled in the Sunday New York Times a couple years ago. The famous story around Patients Like Me is what's called the ALS lithium experiment. So somebody in Italy wrote a blog about how he was taking lithium for his ALS. 24 hours later, someone in India translated that into English, posted it on Patients Like Me. All of a sudden, you had this dynamic clinical trial taking place using patient-reported intelligence. 6 months later, you had a publication in the BMJ. 6 months later. And the finding was that there's no clinical significance, right? But the important take-home here is that it took 6 months. And now, if you Google the ALS lithium experiment, it's still ongoing. Right? So literally, extraordinary patient-driven clinical trial. Patients are now helping to define diagnostic criteria in psychiatry, DSM-5. So psychiatry has now opened its doors to what's called open innovation, letting patients in, letting patients participate in what diagnostic criteria should be. And this is really quite extraordinary. And I would put it to you that every area of medicine is now going to move in this direction, with psychiatry is leading the way. Patients are talking a lot online. And in Canada, we're talking more than in any other country, in any other industrialized country per capita. And it's not so much the amount that matters, but it's the rate of change. It's literally like a straight curve, right? So patients are talking about how good their clinical experience is, how good their continuum of care is, and they're talking about it in very sophisticated ways. And again, if we listen to these conversations, some extraordinary opportunities. And the thesis that's guiding me, and I say us because I'm part of a larger ecosystem here, is that patients have the right to be believed, right? And there's many people who've made this argument. You know, we listen, but do we really listen? Do we really hear? And if we listen carefully in an engaged way to these online conversations, there's lots of opportunity. So the question I'm often asked, right, is the information reliable, right? And it's a great question. And the right answer is, it depends, right? Sometimes it's extraordinarily reliable. Sometimes it's extraordinarily misleading. But the point is, even when it's misleading, it's really valuable. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So we can do sentiment analysis on every healthcare organization in the world. When, as a patient, as a caregiver, you invest trust in an organization, in a healthcare organization, when that trust starts to atrophy, then that affects your decisions over whether or not to go to that hospital, whether or not to invest trust in that organization, right? So this matters to access, to healthcare access. So trust meters are important. Whether or not your perception is based on evidence, the perception matters because as a healthcare organization, you need to engage your citizens or your catchment area better, you need to engage your population better if you are finding this dashboard that's saying that people do not invest faith in your organization. We can listen to patient conversations. And what's really interesting, and there's tons to say about this, but it's really interesting at a high level is that highly stigmatized illnesses, in particular mental health related illnesses, are what is being talked about the most online, on these open access social networks. And when you dig down even deeper, it gets really much more interesting. Single men, for example, talk about depression, suicide, much more in the online non-clinical relationship than they would in the live clinical interface. This is really interesting. So again, this offers all sorts of opportunities. You know, we were very active during H1N1, and the next pandemic, when it happens, is going to be really important to engage misinformation on the internet. So there is a lot of anti-vaccine sentiment on the internet. We're in the midst of publishing some data around this. After Health Canada approved the flu vaccine, basically people's perception of safety did not, or the safety of the vaccine certainly did not improve. What we need to do is we need to combat misinformation in real time online. And we can do that. We know how to do that. So when the next pandemic hits, we've got to get there. And what we can do is we can scrape here, we've got 27,000 hits, opinions, okay? So looking at the internet population, trying to figure out to what extent they're misinformed about this particular safety issue. Another application. So phase 4, post-market drug surveillance, right? For proprietary IP reasons, I can't share with you the class of drugs I'm looking at or the symptom of interest that I'm looking at. But let's just say we're looking at a huge human health burden, and I can compare symptomology of one drug against another. And I can tell you that on the symptom of interest, drug K, looking at thousands of patient conversations online, drug K is that which is reported as having the least, let's just say, side effect of relevance. And we can do this with drugs, we can do it with medical devices as well. So, you know, the take-home lesson, and there's just really one that I want to impart. It's a belief, I could be wrong, it's a hypothesis. But we're in a new era of healthcare. And it transcends healthcare. I mean, it's in many, many industries. And you can either embrace what I call real-time patient-reported intelligence, or people will say you're not listening, right? And that is the worst offense that you can make in any client-oriented sector. And I would put it to you that healthcare is a client-oriented sector. That's all I have to say for now, and I hope we can have some opportunities for chatting. Thank you.